Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Environmental Impact Assessment. Continuing in our process to learn law, policy and institutional arrangements for EIA system, today we will cover domain of ecology. According to the key legislation, guidance and standards available in the domain of ecology, it can be divided into four components. We see that we can see key legislation and guidance and standards legislations are available at international and multinational agreements and conventions. Then you see it at the level of national and regional legislation, and then you also see components like industry codes and best practices. Then also see that there are special interest groups. So accordingly, the coverage of today's session will include that we'll cover international and multilateral agreement and convention. We'll look into the national and regional legislations, codes of practice and best practices, as well as we'll just touch upon special interest groups. So the learning outcomes after completion of this particular session would be that you would be able to identify, list the international and multilateral agreements and conventions, and you should be able to review its implications on our country EIA process. So that you should be able to do. Further, you should be able to identify national and regional legislation, and then you should be able to list different codes of practice and best practices. You should know that which one to refer to when you are dealing with certain domain. And then you should also be able to identify special interest groups, and so that you can take a review and they could be part of your EIA process. So in any country, when you look at when they enter the international convention or multilateral agreements, it affects their assessment process and also their policy. So that's why we are reviewing it, because at the larger level, what you decide, how it really percolates down. So they need all the agreement and convention we get into, they need to align these things. We need to align our targets with as per the global policy and the global targets. So many of these biodiversity related conventions require the country to implement targets in planning process. They also need to implement it in the protection mechanism, and then also include in the EIA process. So that all will influence how you do the things. So therefore, we'll be looking at these aspects, international and multilateral agreements and convention. And you also try to link it back with what we have seen during the timeline and how we were developing understanding in these perspectives. So if you recollect, at the Rio Earth Summit in 2002, many goals and sustainable development principles were initiated, and which led to international agreements supporting sustainable development and biodiversity. And looking at some of the key agreements, which included, like you see, Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD of 1992, which was adopted at Rio Earth Summit. And India is one of the earliest signatories of Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, and became a party in February 1994. So MOEFCC has been designated as the nodal ministry. So this ministry looks at the CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity in the country. And in the image in the center, you can see all the signatories to the convention and India's national report on the left hand side. So later, biodiversity targets were set in 2002. Targets were set for 2010, like what targets will meet. The purpose was to attain considerable reduction. That was the intention in the current rate of biodiversity loss. And then important point for us was that they recommended or they imposed the tools such as EIA and also strategic environmental assessment for consideration and planning of development. So, looking at CBD, 10th Conference of Parties, COP10, their decision to develop strategic plan for biodiversity 2011 and 2020. This was directed, the prime agenda was to achieve several strategic goals, like have goals in place and specifically goals in place to address the root cause of biodiversity loss, what was really causing this biodiversity loss, and how we can have strategies in place to address and reduce those or to control those root cause. And then further, the idea was to reduce the direct pressure on biodiversity, and then also you look at to promote sustainable use of all the resources which are there. Further, you see that the idea was to improve the status of biodiversity by safeguarding ecosystem and especially looking at species and genetic diversity, so that all not only protection or reduction but also improvement of that scenario. And then enhance the benefits to society. So, it's just not one-sided, but then how the benefit would be improved for the society from the biodiversity and ecosystem services, and enhance implementation through participatory planning, knowledge management and capacity building. So, how that people have to be involved and how the knowledge has to be managed and how the capacity of the people has to be built. So, we also see that Bonn Convention, which was on conservation of migratory species of wild animals, 1979. So, this convention targeted to protect threatened animals that migrate across seas and or national boundaries, and specifically for our interest using EIA as a tool for recognizing areas which needed maintenance, and their also the areas apart from their areas and also their migration routes. So, through the process of EIA, using EIA as a tool, we need to identify and then also to protect these areas. So, on the right hand side image, you can see the signatory parties to the convention. Further, you see Ramsar Convention on Wetlands of International Importance in 1971. And through this convention, the target was to conserve the wetlands of the international importance, and then these sites are called as Ramsar sites, and then again using environmental impact assessment and also as using strategic environmental assessment as a tool to consider like what will happen with the biodiversity, with the development in this, and then how we plan to have development of this area, and then how we ensure safeguard and protection of these wetlands. And in India, if you look at this entered into force on 1st February 1982. India currently has 49 sites designated as wetlands of international importance. This keeps changing, so you may be very careful about that. 2 new Ramsar sites have been added, one in Gujarat and another in Uttar Pradesh, which was recently announced on the World Wetland Day at Sultanpur National Park in Gurgaon on February 2022. So, in the image you can see all the Ramsar sites across the world as of date. Further, we see that UNESCO Man and Biosphere Program 1970. This established biosphere reserves. So, through this biosphere reserves were established, and then also there was need to identify different innovative approaches to conserve and address the sustainable development. And there are generally recognized these are also like these biosphere reserves are also recognized as globally important areas, and that should be avoided when development is planned. So, we cannot really plan in these areas or around this. So, you have to be very careful about those, and you need to take in considerations where all these areas lie. And then Man and Biosphere program is being implemented by the Government of India since 1986. So we have been involved in this. The first biosphere reserve of the world was established in 1979. So according to UNESCO, there are currently 727 biosphere reserves in 131 countries, including 22 transboundary sites that belong to World Network of Biosphere Reserve. So the Government of India established 18 biospheres in the country, categories generally related to IUCN. So IUCN provides the categories. So according to that, we have identified. Further, we also see UNESCO World Heritage Convention 1972. The convention targets to protect natural and cultural areas and these areas of outstanding value as World Heritage sites. You can see some sites identified because there are some sites which are identified because of their biodiversity importance. So we see that it came into force in 1975 and India ratified the convention in 1977. Thereafter, we see Berne Convention on the Conservation of European Wildlife and Natural Habitats 1979, and this one aims to protect endangered species and their habitat. It later included Emerald Network of Area of Special Conservation Interest and supporting the European Habitat Directives. So with that it added the Emerald, and if we see what is Emerald, Emerald's network is an ecological network made up of areas of special conservation interest. And its implementation was launched by Council of Europe, and then we see that 49 out of 51 European countries are signatories of the convention, and 4 African countries are part of this, which include Burkina Faso, Senegal, Tunisia and Morocco. So for more information, you can find it out on the website of Council of Europe. Links are provided in following slides and in the suggested watch also. So after that, we also see the Pan-European Biological and Landscape Diversity Strategy developed by Council of Europe, UNEP and European Centre for Nature Conservation. And through this, the target was to link the European and national protected areas together and the ecological network. All of this in order to ensure conservation of Europe's key species, habitats and ecosystem. And then you can also find the book PEB LDS explained. It's a guide for IUCN members to Pan-European Biological and Landscape Diversity. So this guide is also available. You can have a look at that. Link is also provided for you. And if we look at the European level, there are several policies and directives which require establishment of areas to protect biodiversity and planning of development, and particularly to ensure that all the threatened species can be maintained at a favorable conservation status. So we can maintain that. And so in that we find EU biodiversity strategy, which requires European Commissions to produce biodiversity action plans. So they are going to make BAP, biodiversity action plans. Then you have wild birds directive. The target is to protect wild bird species and their habitats, and with particular protection of rare species. So for that also they need to prepare special protection areas. They need to identify special protection areas. I have also given you the link to look at it in detail to explore further. And then we also find habitat directives. The target of these directives was to protect habitats and species, and especially by using measures to maintain and restore favorable conservation status. And again, you have you prepare special area conservations. You declare special areas of conservations here, and you would also use land use and development policies and landscape management outside these special areas of conservation. So again, I have provided you the link here. Then you can also see Water Framework Directive, which also requires that you maintain aquatic, wetland and terrestrial ecosystem with intention to achieve good status. That was about the international level. Now looking at the national and regional legislation, most countries have passed national level environmental assessment legislation, so even we have done that, and then that requires conservation of ecology and biodiversity in the process of doing EIA. So that is required. So whenever the country has signed, so that has to be translated in the EIA process. So protection, conservation and management of wildlife within each country is enacted under the national legislation. So how we protect, how we conserve, how we manage, we take care of all of it under the national legislation. And this will affect the scope of EIA. So whatever we do in EIA will be affected by what kind of national legislation is there, and how we undertake the assessment. So you can see, like in EIA notification, you can see that I had shown you the list, category A, B and so on. So in general conditions, any project or activity is specified if they fall under B category. So we see that protection, conservation and management of wildlife within each country is enacted under national legislation. So if we have national legislation in place to look after this wildlife protection, conservation and management, and whatever this national legislation is, it's going to affect the EIA process. So how you process it, what all you will cover, the scope of EIA would be guided by this national legislation. So for example, you can see that in EIA notification, we have, like you had seen, category A and category B, B1, B2. So whenever you have certain such kind of areas like protected areas, if they are notified under wildlife, then you have eco-sensitive areas as notified under like Environmental Protection Act. Some of the areas, if they fall under this, then they have to be dealt separately in the category A, even though if they are come under the category B. So you see that how it influences the scope of the work and then the process which you would follow. So national legislation either enacts multilateral agreements or provides dedicated legislation on the biodiversity. So the national legislation can enact whatever agreement has happened, or they can have their own legislation on the biodiversity. For example, you can see in UK you have Conservation of Habitat and Species Regulation 2010, which follows from EC directives on conservation of natural habitat and wildlife fauna and flora. And then you also see national legislation on biodiversity and ecology, can be either comprehensive or specific as well. So you can have comprehensive legislation which contains measures to protect habitat, species and areas. So everything is in one in an umbrella act. So you can have comprehensive legislation. For example, you have Wildlife Conservation and Management Act, which is, you can see, from Kenya. Then you have India's Wildlife Protection Act 1972, which is also a comprehensive act. And then you can also see UK Wildlife and Countryside Act 1985, which is again comprehensive act. So there are specific legislations also. So you can have comprehensive or you can have specific. You would see those variations across. So specific legislation relates to protection of specific areas, habitats or species, such as, like, you can have where specific legislation would identify some areas, and based on those areas you have to take care of things. So the most widely used example is the national park legislation. So if the national park is being determined, then you cannot you have to take care of the development, what is happening there. And then the example of this include, like, 1980 New Zealand National Park Act, and then you can also see 2003 South Africa Protected Act, as well as you can see areas of international conservation concerns such as Galapagos also have national area protection. So we see that there can be legislation specifically for species. So these regulations usually supplement the overarching national legislation. So you can have very species specific also, like you can see for example 1992 UK Protection of Badgers Act. So it's only focusing on badgers, and then you can also have habitat or land use specific legislation. These legislation relate to specific habitats or land uses but have implications on ecological conservation. Example is like forest law of Brazil, or you can see forest law of India. So you can also see examples of countries that adopt national and regional systems. So you have all range of all the legislation provided, system provided to you. So you can have a look at them. The list is given to you here. Convention on Biological Diversity and COP10 of 2010, signatory countries to agreed for the national strategic plan, and this also helped to achieve the key targets, which are important to consider in the context of EIA and assessment of potential for development of to affect the biodiversity. We see that because of the Convention of Biological Diversity and COP10 of 2010, the signatory countries, we are also the signatory countries agreed to prepare national strategic plan, and national strategic plan would help us to attain key targets. In India, as per the MOEFCC annual reports, we see the area of work dealt within conservation of biodiversity are aligned with the conventions and related activities. So you can see here you have Convention on Biological Diversity, which India is part, and then Nagoya Protocol and assesses and benefit sharing, ABS. Then you can see National Biodiversity Action Plan and National Biodiversity Targets. You have national reports to CBD. Then you have Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Domestic measures like Biological Diversity Act 2002 and National Biodiversity Authority NBA. So all that you see, which is there in the provision, how we align our things with the global requirement. So you also see that in countries, as per the policy and mechanism, that countries also adopt a national and regional it could be state system, and wildlife legislation can occur both at the national and the regional legislation level. So you see that for example, national level example, you can see national wildlife legislation of Uganda, and you can see at the same time the regional level, the regional national park legislation of Australia, which is like for the state of New South Wales. So you can look at many other policies for review purpose. You can see all those lists have been provided to you here: National and Environmental Policy, then National Wildlife Act, Local Government Act, National. So this is all international, national examples given to you. So you see the range of acts which are there in different countries at different levels. So you can see them here. You can see the Wetland Act, Oil and Gas Policy for Uganda, Fish Act cap, then Animal Prevention and Cruelty Act cap, then Cattle Grazing Act, Protection Act, Prohibition of Burning of Grass Act, Animal Disease cap. So all these you can see. It is important that you would realize, or you must be thinking that you would not know about particular domains. So it is important that you have experts involved in the scoping of EIA, and so that there is full understanding of the involved legislation affecting the protection of wildlife in the country which you are studying. So now looking at the codes of practice and best practices. So you will find number of ecological codes of practice and best practice guidelines, such as you can find EIA guidelines of UK institutes of Ecology and Environmental Management. You would also find MOEFCC in India also provides manual and guidelines for various sectorial in which they have it or have all these information given. So these you can use this for the EIA purpose. Okay. At the international level, you can also find IFC. You can see Environmental and Sustainability Performance Standards. Then you can also see European Bank for Reconstruction and Development also provides, African Development Bank also provides, Asian Development Bank, as well as Inter-American Development Plan. Inter-American Development Bank also provides information on this. So bilateral funding agencies also require this to be taken care of, like the Danish International Development Agency, and then you see USAID, then you also see JICA. All these have requirements related to project financed under the bilateral loans, and you need to take care of ecological and environmental studies associated with the project if that loan, if you are taking loan for your project. So looking at IFC, you see that performance standards which are particularly related with this are performance standard 1, which involves assessment and management of environmental and social risk and impact. And then you also see performance standard 6, which deals with biodiversity and sustainable management of living natural resources. So you can find those things. The link is also given to you. And if you look at PS6, that particularly targets on protecting biodiversity, maintaining the benefits of ecosystem services, and these things are given here. You can also look at the certain classification which PS6 introduces, like you have habitat classification, modified land, natural habitat, critical habitat, legally protected and internationally recognized areas. So all these classifications are there, so you need to take care of those classification while performing EIA. So further moving on, we see that in many countries, professional institutions and then societies, there are also special interest groups which can be of help and then which can review. So it's a good practice to, when you prepare EIA, to get it reviewed. So that review can be taken care of. So looking at various special interest groups. So it is required that you when you prepare EIA, you get it reviewed so that you get inputs in terms of its scoping, in terms of its process, and in terms of the identified impact. And in this way, you can engage with different authorities, planning authorities and ministries and consultants, as well as NGOs and even research institutes, so that enriches your report and makes it much more refined. And you can also engage with the local experts, and they can be helpful at many stages of EIA. And your the appraisal by them will help you to improve the scope, the technical competence of your report, as well as how valid is your report and what kind of measures and mitigations you have supported. So there are a range of special interest groups, and there can be specific interest groups also. Then there can be interest groups related with just species like bats, butterflies, bugs, reptiles and amphibians. For example, you can find Royal Society for Protection of Birds in UK, and then you can also find Audubon Society in US. Then you can also find local museums and data center which can be helpful for you. And then there can be also non-professional special interest groups like local natural history or wildlife groups or cultural groups, which can be helpful for reviewing your EIA report. So that was what we saw today. So summarizing what we covered, we looked at the domain of ecology and what kind of laws and standards and all those apply. So we looked at the international and multilateral agreements and conventions which we align our activities too. Then we looked at national and regional legislation, what are the different categories and how they are different, so that we saw. And then we looked at codes of practice and best practices. Then we looked at these special interest groups. And you can also look at some of the other laws in this area, like you can look at Doon Valley notification. You can also look at the protection of Antop Hill, Bombay, and then also Aravalli ranges. And then you can also look at other sensitive zone like Dhanau ecology protection, and then eco-sensitive zone Panchmali notification, and then Mahabaleshwar, Panchgani areas. All these eco-sensitive zones you can look into for your further understanding. This was the key reference for us. We took from the book of Methods of Environment and Social Impact Assessments, and you can look at the suggested read here provided to you. So all the reports and other documents you can read only if you want to know more. And there are some watch which has been suggested to you. You can see some videos here. So ending up here, please feel free to ask questions. Let us know about any concerns you have. Do share your opinions, experiences, and feel free to make your suggestions. Looking forward to interacting and co-learning with you while exploring AIA. Thank you.